Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling, and I'm your host. So, in recent days, I've noticed that the Liberals are becoming very confrontational. They're becoming very dismissive. They're becoming very aloof, and they want to make you believe that it's not because they're losing their collective mind. But of course, they are. They are desperate. They have no more stories to tell. They know that every time they say to you, it's coming around the corner, that it's going to be here any day now, that we're working on it, that we're making a plan, to have a meeting about making a plan to get started. They know that it's falling on deaf ears. They realize that though the Liberal Party federally might be looking like it's in the 20s, in region to region to region, they're all in third place. And that, that's an indication to polling, and I can talk about that in a different video. In this video, I want to talk about the latest, or the resurgence of the Liberal tactic to try and fear you, to try and scare you, to try and make you believe that there is a monster hidden under your bed who's going to come out as soon as the door closes. Which, of course, in this case is always the same thing for the Liberals, right? It's always about women's autonomy over their own bodies. Now, I won't mention the hypocrisy in the mandates of the vaccine versus what this current tactic that they're trying to tell you. I will say that it is absolutely 100% designed to invoke fear and loathing and not anywhere near the truth. And I'm going to explain that to you once I let you hear the English version of what is billed as the Women's Liberal Caucus, or the Liberal Women's Caucus. Anyway, before I get into it, I would encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this channel with your friends. I have memberships if you want to support the channel that way. I'm trying right now. My primary focus is to be able to afford new equipment so that I can improve the level of my content. All right, so this is the Liberal female caucus and supporters coming to the microphone in a quite frankly transparent attempt to make you believe something that isn't true. Let's have a listen.
As the chairperson of the Liberal Women's Caucus, I'm here representing the Women's Caucus and members of the Liberal Party, and we've sent a letter to the Leader of the Opposition asking him to be very clear with Canadians, and in particular with Canadian women, on what he would do to defend a woman's right to choose. We've seen that his caucus, there are many anti-choice caucus members. We've seen some of their actions recently, including MP Kathy Wagenthal, who at the pro-life rally held here last week said that women who have abortions end up needing redemption, forgiveness, and needing God. We as women want to know whether the Leader of the Opposition will ensure that his caucus does not put forward legislation that in any way impinges on women's rights and freedoms, in particular bodily autonomy. And Sophie was going to say some remarks in French.
Okay, there's another Liberal MP there who's going to speak in French, but I didn't keep the French part because there's no translation. So the press is about to ask them some questions, and the contradiction is kind of funny because on the one hand, she'll tell you that it's all about Pierre Poilievre, and then on the other hand, she'll tell you that it's all about his putting in private members' bills, which no amount of legislation can stop a private member. It's weird. The reason I say that is because the amount of holes in this argument, it's like a sieve.
His office has already said that.
What part is not clear? His office has said that they're not going to use the notwithstanding clause on abortion to regulate abortion. He said he's not going to legislate it, introduce it, pass it. So what part's not clear?
That's his government. There are ways that you can have private members' bill that are introduced as well, and the risk is still there. He voted against Morgentaler back in 2008 as person. I mean, he is, in every sense, that caucus and that leader has made women wonder about the risk that they're going to be taking with this leader. And I want him to come out and unequivocally say that they do everything to defend a woman's right to choose, that they will not allow their members to come forward with private members' bills and put forward bills that suggest that a fetus is a person, which is a backdoor way of, again, addressing this issue.
Is it he was here. The Harper government had 10 years. I know you weren't here. Many of us were. 10 years in power. They had 4 years as a majority, didn't move one bit. And they had private members who wanted to do things and do things. Guys, you are all 30 points down the polls. I'm looking at some of you will not get reelected if there was an election this fall. This is the most cynical play to just throw the abortion scare tactic. Would you like to respond to that observation?
Absolutely. It's
Please.
not a scare tactic. We've seen what's happened in the States. Do people really think Roe versus Wade would have been overturned? Do we think what was happening there was going to happen? I've been in the women's movement for over 50 years. It is not a scare tactic. Things are going backwards, not only in Canada, but around the world. And these are real risks for Canadians. We need to know very clearly
They are not.
that party, policies put forth at the convention, individual members are not going to introduce things because we do not want to go the same way as the United States. So it is not a scare tactic. It is a very strong concern. And I may not have been here then, but I was other places working on women's rights, okay? So do not use that as a reason why it's not a scare tactic.
Last question.
Let's just put it back the other way. The government hasn't also legislated to protect abortions either, right? So why doesn't your government introduce legislation to make it harder for that to get rolled back if there is a conservative government?
You do not want to legislate woman's body. You do not legislate woman's body. That is not. You make sure that you have access to abortion. You don't want to legislate anybody's body, particularly a woman's.
Even if that is to protect the right to choose, like you're calling
No,
to do?
you don't want to legislate your ovaries, your uterus. No, that is not the way that you protect women's rights.
So the amount of contradiction in that last statement I saved for the end. I would just say, first of all, that Roe versus Wade is not what the Liberals want you to believe it is. It doesn't translate to Canada because in the United States of America, the states have independent rights from the criminal system, which is to say that you can do things in California and not get arrested for it that will get you arrested for it in Rhode Island, which, will be on the other side of the country. There's things you can do in Texas, like carry a firearm that would get you arrested in, like, I don't know, let's just call it Massachusetts. I don't know what the gun laws are, but I'm just saying the idea that the state has rules over these things instead of the federal government having rules over these things doesn't translate into Canada. In Canada, we have what's called British common law, and that is very, very, very important because first of all, British common law is legislation. So I don't know where this woman in her head who is an elected member of the Legislative Assembly. But, the fear that they're trying to instill into you is all they care about, right? They have tunnel vision. They don't care about anything except for the fact that they might not have jobs after. I personally don't want any of them to get any. If you get reelected, then then you earned your pension. But there's a reason that pension is set at the time limit it is so that people can't just backdoor their way into it, but that's a different video. For this video, I want you to hear that Roe versus Wade wasn't decided on a woman's right to have an abortion. Roe versus Wade was decided that the federal government didn't have the right to tell the individual state what to do. And that's exactly the difference, right? We don't have that here. We don't have the ability to say if a person gets convicted of a certain thing in Newfoundland, then that same sentence and that same crime applies in British Columbia. That's in the Criminal Code of Canada, a book that is nothing but legislation. And that is the primary difference between the two. So don't let it worry you. Don't let it bother you. Secondly, I don't care what they're doing in the rest of the world. This is Canada. I'm sick and tired of putting my lens on every other country in the whole wide world. The amount of countries I can talk to about where this woman's autonomy is not a thing is ridiculous. The amount of them that are around this world right now wouldn't even compare, right? So why we talk about it when it suits you, but when it goes against you? We have to stay focused on Canada because Canada is where we live and Canada is where this issue is being brought up with people. Okay, so now let's get to the crux of this issue and how it pertains to Canada and how it works in Canada and why you as a woman listening to this need to understand that they're trying to manipulate you to get your vote. There's no fear or danger of it at all because it's the system that we use. Now here I just pulled up a random wiki from this 1988 decision of the Supreme Court of Canada for Morgentaler, who was a doctor that performed it. Now in those days, when we first remember, hospitals are started by religious groups. Long before we got free healthcare, they were founded and funded by religious groups, whether it be Presbyterians or Catholics or Jewish or other Protestant forms, just different Christianity they were the ones that start the hospital, and then they get, they would raise funding and all of that stuff. And then in the 60s, they brought in the universal health care, and the government stepped in and they sort of changed the system. But because the hospital performed those things, there used to be a permission to have them, but you had to get a permission. Like you could get, you could have this procedure performed on you, but you had to get the permission of this 3-panel from a hospital, which at the time, let's be straightforward, most of the panel was men. Now, 3-person panel, excuse me. And so a lot of times unless there was a physical concern, they would say, no, give birth and then put the child into the adoption programs and don't worry about it. And, you're one of these kind of women because you weren't married and all of the other things that you hear about. So then the doctor come along, his name is Morgentaler, and he decided that here it was. He took it to the Supreme Court of Canada in 1988. The Supreme Court ruled 30 was decision of the Supreme Court of Canada, which held that abortion provisions in the criminal code, which is legislation, was unconstitutional because it violated women's rights under Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you can see it here. It's quite long, it's quite lengthy, but it opens up with everyone has the right to life, liberty, security of persons, and the right to not to be deprived thereof, the exception of accordance to the principles of fundamental justice. Everyone has the right to be secure against unreasonable search and seizure. Now, the first part, right, has the right to life, liberty, security of person is what we talk about. This is the term security of person where we get the autonomy over bodies. And the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the Dr. Morgentaler and his legal crew had an absolute right, and they were correct. And as a result, in 1988, the legislation changed to say that you were no longer allowed to violate Section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Now, this is important, ladies. I need you to hear this. You are no longer permitted to violate Section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms because it's a woman's fundamental right. And then they changed it all. They got all these little it's a right to choose and all of these things. But the fact of the matter is that because we live in a country of common law, where if it's the Supreme Court of Canada decides it immediately becomes enacted across the country. Then they made changes to the supportive legislation so that it can be taken care of inside of a hospital and under the provincial payment plan. What you should be worried about if you care about this issue, if you're a woman and you really want to care about what's going on, is you should look at step 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The guarantee of rights and freedoms is here in front of you, right? And it says the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees, this is number 1, this is first before everything else. The rights and freedoms set out in its subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Now in the trucker convoy, they suspended number 1. They said that it's no longer a free society, which then made all of the other ones no good. This is exactly what happened. Reasonable limits is the word that you got to hear. So when the trucker convoy happened, technically you didn't have autonomy over your own body. When they enacted step 1 of the Emergencies Act, what they did under step 1, which the Supreme Court has found to be illegal and all of those other things, but that's what they did. They removed step 1, which made all the rest of them, the right to peaceful assembly, wrong, gone, finished, done. So if you, as a woman out there, are worried about the autonomy of women's bodies, what you should be talking about is having this removed from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Having those words, reasonable limits, removed from the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to ensure that what is already enshrined in law in Canada stays that way. Because this is only one emergency away from removing all of your bodily autonomy. Okay, so this is what they're hoping that you'll do, right? That you'll overreact because you're not necessarily informed. Now you are informed. Now you can make an informed decision. Now, if you want to tell yourself that you would rather go hungry and vote for the Liberal Party and have your economy destroyed, which somehow will improve your bodily autonomy, I'm not sure how that works, but that's the liberal logic, I guess. Or you can have one who's trying to say, you know what, I need a better society so that I can have all the money I need to spend and go shopping and all of the things that I like to do without having to be ground down into a nub just so that ideologues in Ottawa can decide, that they get all the money and we get none. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you all for listening, and I would appreciate it if you would like, comment, subscribe, share this channel with your friends. I'll talk to you next time.